He handed her the divorce papers on Christmas Eve, right in front of the whole family, thinking she would cry, beg, or plead. But what happened next froze the entire room. Have you ever seen a woman who didn't scream, didn't shout, didn't break a single thing, yet still managed to shatter the man across from her with nothing but a nod and a carefully wrapped gift? They call women emotional, fragile, too soft. But softness doesn't mean weakness. Sometimes, silence is the sharpest weapon. In a world where cruelty is masked as humor, where control is sprinkled like sugar over a frosted cake, there is a kind of woman who doesn't storm out. She stays, watches, remembers, prepares. Not for revenge, but for reclamation. The story you're about to hear isn't about tears. It's about precision, resolve, and a victory built from the smallest, most deliberate details, a napkin with a forgotten signature.
An anonymous hotel receipt.
A single click into a secret inbox. A drunkenly signed contract, legally binding, down to the last period. This isn't a revenge plot. It's a masterclass in never underestimating a woman who's been silent for too long. If you've ever believed that a woman is only strong when she's loud, stay. Because this story will make you think again. It begins at a dinner table, and ends with a declaration that needed no words. And it will give you chills, until the very last second. The most painful thing isn't being hurt. It's being hurt by the one person you believed would protect you. And what's crueler than betrayal? When it's choreographed like a joke, a performance, a show, right in front of your family, your friends, under the warm glow of holiday lights and raised glasses of celebration. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't flip the table or ruin the dinner. I just signed, one stroke, and smiled. Because I was ready. I'm not telling this story to gain your sympathy. I'm telling it so you understand. Cruelty doesn't always come with a punch. Sometimes, it comes dressed in polite smiles, hollow compliments, and hugs as cold as steel. My husband once said women like me were predictable. He said I'd cry, beg, fall apart. And his best friend, he placed a bet. They thought this was a comedy. But they forgot, I'm not a supporting role in their show. I used to believe in love. I did. In the little things, dinners after work, a hug from behind while doing dishes. But love didn't live in my house. Only emotional bruises. Words salted with spite. Compliments that cut like slow, quiet blades against my pride. He never yelled. Never hit. He just smiled. When he said, I was useless. When he told me I should be grateful he stayed. When he reminded me not to embarrass him in front of his friends. At first, I defended him. He's just tired, I said. He's stressed. But the truth was, I was dissolving. Piece by piece. I stopped answering my mother's calls. I drifted from my friends. I stopped being me. And maybe you're there too. But hear me, no one has the right to shrink you into a shadow. No one gets to demand loyalty while quietly paving the way for betrayal. I'm not telling this because I cried. I'm telling it because I stopped crying. And when a woman stops crying, it's not because she's broken. It's because she's remembering who she is. You're hearing this for a reason. Maybe you needed a reminder that you're not alone. Or maybe you're getting ready for your own ending. And if you are, stay. Because this story is just getting started. Because sometimes, what makes a woman strong isn't her ability to endure. It's her quiet resolve to leave when no one is watching. They thought I was weak because I stayed silent. What they didn't know is that in that silence, I was remembering. Every controlling word. Every unexplained late night. Every time I was made into a joke in front of others. I didn't react, didn't get angry. I just took one step back, looked closer, listened harder, and remembered deeper. He thought I had grown used to living in his shadow. But the truth is, I was digging a tunnel out. Every receipt, every sigh, every night he disappeared, they all became bricks in that path. And when the day came, I didn't need to run. I just needed to walk. You see, I'm not special. I'm not a superhero. I don't have powers or a master plan. I'm just a woman who once loved, once hoped, and once broke so completely that there was nothing left to lose. And in that moment, I saw what I still had. I had choice. I had memory. I had the law. And most of all, I had myself. He bet I'd collapse the moment he withdrew. What he didn't know was, I had already risen long before. I just hadn't left yet. I stayed, not for him, but because I was waiting for the perfect moment to reclaim everything I once gave away. And when that moment came, I didn't need anyone to call me strong. I only needed him to realize it was already too late. So if you're hearing these words in the quiet of a late night, somewhere between a sigh and 1,000 unnamed doubts, I want you to know, you are not alone. And you don't need to scream to be heard. Sometimes, the most powerful voices are the silent ones. Stay. Because what comes next will change everything. I know, you're probably wondering. Why didn't she leave sooner? Why did she stay so long? But the truth is, leaving isn't always simple. Not when you're being manipulated through affection, surrounded by sweet words laced with contempt, when every day you're convinced that you are nothing without the other person. I lived in that circle long enough to understand. The most dangerous thing isn't the cruel words, it's when you start to believe them. When you begin to question your own worth. When you're no longer sure if an apology is truly an apology, or just another tactic to make you stay one more day. But then, there's a moment. A tiny one. Maybe it's a look. Maybe it's a sentence. Or a folded hotel receipt found tucked inside the pocket of his freshly washed jeans. And in that moment, you don't feel hurt anymore. You feel clarity. I held on to that moment like a slow-burning ember, not to set everything on fire, but to warm the courage I had nearly forgotten. I stopped asking him where he was at night. I stopped looking at his phone like it held the evidence of my own heartbreak. I simply watched, remembered, prepared. He thought he had all the power. But what he couldn't anticipate was a woman who no longer feared him. And that was the beginning of his end. If you're hearing this and your heart is beating just a little faster, if something inside you echoes with every word, then believe me, it's not a coincidence. Maybe you're not ready, but you're waking up. And that awakening, however quiet, is a power in itself. This story isn't over. It's just entered its most important chapter. And I'm going to tell you everything, because when a woman walks through fear, she's no longer who she was. She doesn't need to scream for justice. She doesn't need to prove anything to anyone. She only needs to quietly do the one thing he never thought she had the courage to do. I used to sit at the end of the dinner table, forcing a smile while being made the punchline. I used to cook meals he never touched, answer questions like a machine just to avoid criticism. I used to fake sleep when he came home late and pretend to believe him when he lied. But I don't pretend anymore. He gave me a gift, without even realizing it. Not a ring, not a house, not a firstborn child, but a signature. A foolish signature on a piece of paper he thought meant nothing. But to me, it was a map, one that led straight to freedom. I kept it, backed it up, sent it to the one person I trusted most. And then I kept living like I knew nothing. I smiled when he put his arm around me in public, stayed silent when he bragged about his business wins. I cooked his favorite meals, chose the wine he liked best. All so he'd keep believing I was still under his control. But the truth was, I had left a long time ago. Only my body remained. They say the one who laughs last laughs hardest. But I didn't laugh. I didn't need to. I just watched him fall into the trap he thought he was setting for me. And I felt a strange, calm stillness inside me. Never underestimate a woman who is quiet. Because she may not be broken. She may simply be remembering. And preparing. Where are you in this story? Are you watching from the outside? Or are you the one waiting for your moment to rise? Stay with me. Because what comes next is when silence finally speaks. And when silence speaks, it doesn't need to be loud. It only needs the right moment. I chose that moment carefully, day by day, milestone by milestone. I didn't act out of impulsive emotion. I acted because I had the patience to see the full picture. And I understood. Men like him aren't afraid of tears. They're used to them. They even see them as proof of weakness. But they fear what they can't control. They fear when you stop reacting. When you stop asking, stop begging, stop trying to make them happy. They fear your indifference. I no longer argued. I no longer asked why the hotel charge was on his card. I no longer questioned why messages came at 3 a.m. I just saved everything. Quietly. Systematically. Not out of vengeance, but because I knew the day would come, and I had to be ready. Maybe you think, since when did marriage become an intelligence operation? But when the person beside you sees you as a pawn in their power game, you learn to become a strategist. I didn't fight back with harsh words. I simply showed him, maybe for the first time in his life, that he wasn't the only one with a plan. And he wasn't the only one who could keep secrets. The night he served me divorce papers on Christmas Eve, he thought it was checkmate. But I sat at that table holding every card. With calm, with undeniable evidence, with a plan mapped down to the tiniest detail, from signature to notarization. That wasn't a moment of victory. It was a moment of release. I didn't need to make him regret it. I only needed to walk away unchained. And leave him with exactly what he had planted all those years. Emptiness, coldness, and truth. And, do you want to know the best part? It's not that I won. It's that I'm no longer playing his game. Next, I'll tell you exactly how I prepared that turning point. Don't go. Because you need to know, liberation doesn't come in a scream. It comes in silence, strategically planned, I spent months just watching. Not to endure, but to understand every step he took, every tiny habit he repeated, every moment he felt invincible because he thought I knew nothing. He once told me, if we ever split up, you'll come crawling back. Because you can't live without me. Because you don't even know how to fix the Wi-Fi. Because you're not strong enough. Because you need me to survive. // and I nodded. I smiled. I agreed. On the outside, I was the wife he loved to showcase. On the inside, I was the woman he never imagined would dare to push back. That was his biggest mistake. I began marking everything. In a tiny pocket calendar, I drew dots, stars, symbols only I understood. A star for every lie. A dot for each night he didn't come home. An X when I had solid proof. No one noticed that little calendar mixed in with my grocery lists. No one knew the external hard drive held hundreds of screenshots. No one questioned why I suddenly cared about contract clauses, why I asked Alyssa, my lawyer friend, about legal terms I'd never once thought about before. Every time he laughed, I laughed back. Every time he belittled me in front of others, I nodded. And every time he thought my silence meant submission, I wrote another journal entry, stored another receipt, moved another inch closer to freedom. No one saw I was planning an escape that didn't require running. An exit with my head held high, everything calculated, not just to walk away from him, but to finally walk away from the role I'd been playing far too long. He thought he was the director, but I was rewriting the script. And when that day came, I didn't need to perform. I just needed to live authentically. Do you know that feeling? That electric calm of knowing you're about to reclaim your life? Not through noise, but through strategy. Not through tears, but through truth. Don't go anywhere. Because next, I'm going to tell you about the plot twist he never saw coming, // it started with a napkin. A drunken signature scribbled like a joke, a taunt he thought would make me feel small, make me feel needy, make me cling tighter to the man who kept pushing me away. That night, after a company party, he collapsed onto the sofa, laughing when I brought up the idea of a prenup. He raised an eyebrow, smirking, pulled out a pen, and signed his name on a cocktail napkin. If you need proof of your insecurity, he said with a half laugh, here you go. He forgot. But I didn't. I remembered every word, every crease in that napkin. And the next morning, without a single word, I had it notarized. Alyssa was the only one who knew. She didn't ask questions, just looked at me with eyes that understood. Not everyone prepares to fight. Some prepare to survive. We didn't stop with the napkin. We turned it into a legally binding document, a real agreement, with terms, with context, with evidence of consent, with a signature, a date, a seal, a witness. Alyssa called it the knife he placed in your hand. I called it the exit door. From that day on, I lived like nothing had happened, but everything had. I was no longer the woman who tortured herself over a cold husband. I was the woman who knew exactly where she would go if the whole house came crashing down. I began learning how to not need him. In small ways first, changing the kitchen light, calling the plumber, resetting the Wi-Fi, building a budget. I took control of my life, one step at a time. And every step whispered, you don't need to be a shadow. You can be whole. He still laughed. Still walked around with that smug assurance. Still believed I'd softened. What he didn't see was that I hadn't softened. I was summoning a storm. Because when a woman no longer fears losing, she begins reclaiming everything. And on the night he thought would be his final blow, I handed him the very thing he once tossed aside like a joke. And when he realized he was the first to sign it, he finally understood. He'd just lost everything. But I wasn't done yet. // because when you've lived for years in a house built brick by brick with manipulation and silence, you don't just walk out a door. You dismantle the entire structure, piece by piece, floor by floor. After updating and legalizing the agreement, Alyssa suggested we add a few supplemental clauses. Not because I wanted to win, but because I needed to protect myself and the child. She looked at me, not as a lawyer, but as a woman who had seen far too many others stumble out of the wreckage with trembling legs and hollow hearts. We added financial clauses. Parenting rights in case of dispute. Clear proof of consent and clarity at the time of signing. We stripped away every loophole he might try to exploit. I still remember how it felt printing the final version. The paper wasn't thick, but it felt like a shield. Not to strike, but to finally block every blow I used to take without defense. I hid it well, just like I'd hidden everything else. The moments I was made to feel small, the interruptions mid-sentence, the dreams that were dismissed as foolish. But this time, I didn't hide it to forget. I hid it to wait for the right moment. And that moment came sooner than expected. A message popped up on his phone. I saw it when I set his coffee down. Just a flash. A number saved as M. The message. She suspects nothing. I'll be there on time. Camera ready. I didn't flinch. My heart didn't break. All I felt was one thing. The moment had come. He thought he was the writer of this script. But he didn't know that long ago, I had become the director. And that Christmas, while everyone else was toasting under twinkling lights, I was ready for the final act. Not for revenge, but for closure.
Clean.
Legal. Quiet. But strong enough to make sure he'd never stand the same again. Have you ever watched someone fall without anyone needing to push?
I have.
And it started with a signature he thought was just a joke. Backslash, backslash, that Christmas Eve. Everything was staged to perfection, like a cozy family dinner bathed in soft candlelight, the glow casting golden shadows on wooden walls, creating a false sense of peace. The scent of cinnamon, roasted chicken, the clinking of cutlery, and polite laughter. All of it was a beautiful shell wrapped around a bomb about to go off. I moved around the table, refilling wine for his mother, asking about his father's retirement, folding extra napkins for his sister. All roles I'd played like a seasoned actress on a stage I knew too well. Only I knew that beneath that gentle exterior, I was waiting for the moment. And then it arrived. He stood, tapping his wine glass with the butter knife like he always did when he wanted to hold court. That familiar smile curled on his lips, the smug expression of a man who believed he was in control. He walked over to me, pulled a white envelope from his suit pocket, and laid it on the table with the flourish of someone who thought he was delivering something clever. "A gift for you," he said. No one understood what was happening. But I did.
He did.
And the only person still smiling was me. I opened the envelope. Read each line of the pre-signed divorce papers. No explanation.
No palagi.
Just a meticulously planned gesture, something he and his vile best friend had plotted like a cruel end-of-year bet. I nodded, picked up a pen.
Signed.
One clean stroke. He looked startled, confused why I didn't scream, didn't cry, didn't toss the wine glass or storm from the room. I simply smiled and said, as softly as a breeze skimming the lake, "Thank you." Then I placed a small gift box on the table. Gold wrapping paper, crimson ribbon, bright and impossible to ignore amidst the dinner spread. He opened it. Inside was a stack of documents. His eyes stopped on the title of the first page. Prenuptial agreement. Notarized. Submitted. Legally binding. He looked up at me as if the floor beneath him had just given way. I didn't need to say a word, because I knew he understood. Every insult, every bet that I would break, every smug belief that he was untouchable, now crashing back on him like a tidal wave of his own making. I didn't need to defeat him. I only needed him to realize I was never losing. Backslash, backslash, he sat there, frozen, as if the mask he'd worn for years had just been torn off in front of everyone. The arrogance, once gleaming in his eyes, was now replaced by confusion and fear. I watched as he glanced back down at the stack of papers, flipping through them quickly, desperately, as if hoping to find a loophole, an error, any reason to invalidate what was unfolding. But there was none. His name, his signature.
Exact that is.
Legal notarization. Clauses detailed down to every line. Everything he had signed on that drunken night, thinking it was all a joke, without even reading. And in that moment, I saw his expression shift. It wasn't anger anymore. It was real, unfiltered fear. The room stayed silent. His mother stared at her lap. His father removed his glasses and cleaned them slowly, as if to avoid meeting anyone's gaze. That smirking best friend beside him, face pale, mouth shut. I slowly reached into my purse and pulled out another envelope.
Smaller. Thinner.
My final gift. I placed it on the table, sliding it gently toward him. He opened it, his hands slightly trembling. And when the ultrasound image appeared, when the words, 8 weeks, glowed beneath the tiny silhouette, his lips parted. Maybe to apologize. Maybe to beg. Maybe to explain. But I didn't give him the chance. I lifted my head, and with a voice eerily calm, I said, "I don't need you to be a father if all you intend to be is the wrecking ball." The room dropped a few degrees, but I felt light, unburdened. I had lived too long with guilt, fear, and self-doubt. And in a matter of minutes, I reclaimed it all. Not through rage, but with undeniable clarity. He thought I would crumble when handed those divorce papers. But what he didn't know was that I had already signed, long before he ever thought of leaving me. I gave him one last look, then said, simply, "I'll be changing the locks in the morning." And with that, I turned to my sister, smiled, and asked, "Anyone want more apple pie?" Backslash, the question I had just asked sliced through the frozen air like a blade. No one answered right away. The room felt as though it was struggling to breathe again after a silent explosion. Brandon, or no, I no longer wanted to call him by name as if it still belonged to me, sat there, eyes vacant, hand still gripping the envelope like he hoped it would vanish if he simply held on. His mother inched her chair back. Her face was drained of color, the lines around her mouth drawn tight. I saw it wasn't just shock on her face, but the shame of a mother who suddenly realized the kind of man she had raised. His father bowed his head, wordless. He had always been the quiet one, and this time, his silence said more than any words could. Beth, my sister, looked at me with eyes glistening not from sorrow, but from relief. She reached under the table, squeezed my hand.
She didn't need to speak.
I knew she was saying, finally, Nate, Brandon's best friend, the one who had bet on my tears, now stared blankly at the ultrasound photo, as if it were evidence of a crime he could no longer deny. He wasn't smiling anymore. I stood.
Slowly.
Unrushed. I didn't need to declare victory. True victory is when you don't need anyone to name it, but every gaze in the room silently acknowledges you've stepped out of the shadow they helped construct. I walked to the kitchen, picked up a knife and a pie server, and in the stillness, the sound of the blade cutting through the golden crust rang out, strangely sharp, almost ceremonial. Like closure. The next morning, sunlight slipped through the curtains, softly brushing the ceiling like a whisper. It's time to begin again. I stepped out of bed, bare feet meeting the cool wooden floor, but inside, I felt strangely warm. No more heavy footsteps thudding from downstairs. No more clinking glass on the kitchen counter, like a warning of another bad mood. Just silence. And this time, it was the kind of silence that didn't make me shrink. I made myself a cup of coffee. For the first time in years, I chose the kind I liked, strong, rich, and slightly bitter. Not the watered-down version he insisted on because women shouldn't drink anything too intense. I turned on an old jazz record, letting the music swirl through every corner of the kitchen, sweeping away the remnants of so many gray mornings. The baby's cry floated down from upstairs, not urgent, not tense. I walked up, scooped her into my arms, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "Mama's here. Not going anywhere." I changed her diaper, nursed her, and sat by the window, the one where sunlight poured over the old sofa I once thought of throwing out, but now loved more than ever. Every little thing in this house was being rechosen by me, not for anyone else's approval, but because I wanted it. I started writing a to-do list. Call the locksmith, contact the bank, change the name on the accounts, cancel all the subscriptions I never signed up for but still got charged each month, one of Brandon's old habits. Every bullet point was one step further out of his shadow. Then, I called Alyssa to let her know I was ready to make everything public if needed. She wasn't surprised. She simply said, "I knew you'd get here. And now you're not alone."
No.
I wasn't alone anymore. I had my daughter. I had myself. And I had a future where I laid the very first stone. I didn't know exactly where it would all lead. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid. I felt free. And this time, I would never let that go again. That afternoon, as the sun began to lean westward and light filtered into the living room at a soft diagonal, I sat at my small desk by the window, flipping through the worn pages of a former life, utility contracts in his name, credit card bills with transactions I never knew about, hotel booking emails from business trips he never invited me on. I gathered them all into a cardboard box and labeled it / no longer mine, / it wasn't meant to be thrown away. It was evidence. But I no longer needed to look back. I just needed to know it was there, sorted, categorized, put in its rightful place. Just like the way I was rearranging every broken piece of this life.
The phone rang.
An unknown number. I hesitated for a second, then answered. "Hello, I'm calling on behalf of Mr. Brandon as his legal representative." I said nothing. "He's requesting to renegotiate a few of the terms. If you have time." "I don't." I cut in, voice calm, without the slightest tremble. "The agreement is signed. Certified. And I have no interest in any belated compromise." There was a brief pause on the other end before the voice replied, flatly, "I'll relay the message to my client." I hung up, gently, as if declining a pizza order.
No emotion. No entanglement.
No return. That evening, my sister dropped by with a box of spaghetti and 2 strawberry ice creams. We sat on the floor, backs against the sofa, my baby in the bassinet in front of us, her little feet bouncing to the rhythm of the music. "How are you feeling?" she asked, not coddling, not pretending. I took a spoonful of ice cream, smiled. I've never felt more like myself. She didn't say another word, just lifted her cup and tapped it gently against mine. A soft ting echoed, a toast without language. Outside, snow began to fall.
Light. Thin.
I stepped onto the porch, holding my daughter in my arms, staring up into the soft-lit night sky. Snowflakes landed in my hair, melting instantly, cold, but not cutting. I whispered to her, "We've weathered the storm, my love. Now it's time to live. Truly live." And in that thin snowfall, like a whispered blessing, I knew. Peace isn't something you find out there. Peace is what happens when you rise after it all, and choose yourself. / The next morning, I didn't wake to angry footsteps or a door slamming behind me. I woke to the sound of my daughter laughing, a sound as light as wind, as soft as morning sun, and stronger than any word of comfort I'd ever heard. I picked her up, set her on my lap, and we sat by the window, where sunlight filtered through the thin curtains, casting flickering shadows on the wall. In a whispering, gentle voice, I told her stories, about the strength of silence, about the days I had forgotten who I was, and how I found myself again in the middle of the dark. I didn't know if she understood any of it. Probably not. But I believed that even if she couldn't grasp the words, she could still feel something. Her mother was no longer anyone's shadow. My phone rang again. This time it was Alyssa. He's just requested to void the contract and asked for visitation rights 3 times a week. Asterisk, asterisk, she said, her tone calm but sharp. But we have grounds to contest it. Do you want to proceed? I looked at my daughter, sucking her tiny fingers, her eyes crystal clear, untouched by the smoke and dust of this world. And I answered firmly, yes. But not for revenge. For protection. We agreed. Then I sat at the kitchen table and wrote a new list, one that contained only things I do for myself. No more trying to be lovable. No more staying silent to keep the peace. No more shrinking to keep the house calm. I wrote, enroll in that design class I used to dream of, take my daughter to the park every weekend, replant the lavender my mother once loved, write a book, tell it all not to accuse, but to release. That afternoon, when the snow stopped falling, I took my daughter for a walk around the neighborhood.
People smiled at me.
A few stopped to congratulate me. Not because they knew everything, but because they could feel it. I was different. I walked steadier. My eyes looked straighter. My shoulders were no longer tense. And inside me, something began to bloom. Something I thought had long since died. Hope. Not hope that someone would come and love me completely, but hope that I would love myself fully. And from there, no one would ever be able to take that away again. That night, after my baby had fallen into a deep sleep, I sat alone in the rocking chair in the bedroom, a steaming cup of chamomile tea nestled in my hands. The house was so quiet, I could hear the tick of the clock marking each second, the wind brushing past the window with its familiar creaks, sounds that once used to frighten me, because they reminded me I was alone. But this time was different. I wasn't afraid of the silence anymore. I had learned how to sit with it without feeling small, without feeling lost. I set the cup down, opened the drawer of my small writing desk, and pulled out the brown leather journal. Flipping to the next blank page, I wrote, I survived. Not by luck,
but by choice.
Each word that flowed from my pen felt like a quiet declaration, a reminder that I was no longer the woman shaped by someone else's gaze, by hollow compliments, or by the fear of being left. I was the one who had chosen to stay, then chosen to leave, and after that, chosen to return to myself. I kept writing, I owe no one an apology for standing up. I am not obligated to be gentle when I am wounded. I won't wait to be offered a chance. I'll make one myself. I sat still beneath the soft golden light, thinking of the future. Not with worry, but with curiosity. Curiosity about how far a woman could go after being buried so deep, and yet choosing to rise. There's no revenge plot. No grand reappearance meant to make anyone regret. I don't need them to understand how much I hurt. I only need them to know I healed. Tomorrow, I'll begin writing the first chapter of the book I've always postponed. Not to complain, but so that anyone who's ever been where I've been will know they're not alone. Because if a woman once silenced, once convinced she had nothing left but endurance, can rise again, with a child in her arms and resolve in her heart, then so can you. I took a deep breath, closed my eyes, and for the first time in years, I slept soundly. Not because I was exhausted, but because I had finally come home. To myself, // the next morning, I woke up without an alarm. Not because of duty or pressure, but because for the first time in years, my body no longer carried the invisible weight of anxiety and defense. I opened my eyes and felt enough. I stepped out of bed and walked through the narrow hallway toward the kitchen. Everything looked the same, but the feeling had changed. The house that once felt like a place I struggled to survive had truly become a home. Not because someone built it for me, but because I had rebuilt it myself. Every emotional brick, every quiet corner of peace. On the dining table, the old box of wedding photos still sat quietly. I had thought about throwing it away many times. But then I realized, I didn't need to destroy the past to deny it. I just needed to put it in its rightful place. It was part of the journey, but it no longer defined me. I took the box out to the backyard, where a small wooden shelf stood, one I had built to hold potted plants. I placed it there.
No ceremony, no shoro.
Just a quiet release. That afternoon, I took my child to the grocery store. It might sound trivial, but to me, it was a new expression of freedom. I no longer checked the clock constantly, no longer worried about which item might spark his anger, or how his eyes would scan the receipt. I chose everything I liked. Green apples, whole wheat bread, a bouquet of white daisies, and a deep red lipstick, the shade he once called too flashy. I didn't buy it out of spite. I bought it because I liked it, because I had the right to like it. Later, I stood before the mirror, applying the lipstick slowly. Each stroke not only colored my lips, but restored a part of me I had forgotten. The woman in the mirror wasn't someone new. She was me, fully. That night, after putting my baby to sleep, I sat once again with my journal. I added one more line to the list of things I would now do. Never apologize for choosing myself. Then I set the pen down and smiled. Not because everything was perfect, but because I knew I was heading in the right direction. And I wouldn't look back again. // a few days later, I received a pale gray envelope sent from his legal representative's firm. I knew exactly what was inside. I didn't need to open it to guess. A proposal, or worse, a veiled threat wrapped in the cold language of the law. But I opened it anyway, because I wasn't afraid anymore. Inside was a new agreement, a request to renegotiate custody terms, visitation hours, accompanied by carefully worded lines masquerading as good faith attempts at reconciliation. I skimmed the neatly formatted text, the paragraphs laced with tones that were both gentle and threatening.
He still didn't understand.
This wasn't about winning. This was about making sure my daughter never grows up thinking that love comes with contempt. I called Alyssa. Her voice was steady, as always. "There's nothing enforceable in here," she said. "It's just one last pull of the string. Do you want to respond?" I paused for a moment, then replied, "No need. Sometimes silence is the clearest answer." I folded the letter and placed it in the folder with the rest of the things that no longer stung to touch. It didn't hurt me anymore. It was just an old part of a story I was now rewriting, in my own voice. That evening, I sat on the sofa, my daughter asleep on my chest, her tiny hands clinging to my collar as if the world outside no longer mattered. I looked down at her peaceful face and silently vowed, "You'll never see your mother stay just to keep someone. You'll see her choose herself, so you'll know you can do the same." Outside, the rain began to fall gently. Each drop tapped on the roof like a soft rhythm. That sound used to make me flinch at night, when I lived in fear of sudden, unpredictable rage. Now it was the soundtrack of peace. I closed my eyes, one hand gently stroking her hair, the other resting over my chest, where my heart no longer braced itself, no longer shut tight. I didn't need anyone to call me strong. I only needed to look at myself and know I had lived truthfully. Not perfectly, but truthfully. And from now on, I would write the rest of my life not through endurance, but through choice. // a week later, I received a call from an old friend, Julia, someone who used to be close to me before I quietly disappeared from all my relationships out of shame, exhaustion, and the belief that no one could possibly understand. Her voice came through the phone, hesitant yet gentle. "I saw your post. About the hearing. About the baby. About how you left." I smiled. I didn't leave. I came home. There was a pause on the other end. Then Julia whispered, so softly I had to tilt my head to hear her clearly, "I wish I had your kind of courage." And in that moment I understood. I wasn't the only one who had lived in a quiet cage, disguised as love. There are hundreds, thousands of women living in homes with all the furniture, but none of the emotional safety. I told her what I should have told myself a long time ago. Courage isn't about walking away. Courage is facing the truth. Even when it's ugly. Even when it hurts. After the call, I sat quietly in the living room as the afternoon sun poured through the window, casting everything in a warm amber hue. I felt grateful, not for what I had lost, but for what I no longer had to hold on to. I no longer had to hold in the silence. I no longer had to hold up a perfect image. I no longer had to hold back and pretend I was fine. I would only hold on to what mattered. My daughter. My laughter. Quiet afternoons. And myself, no longer defined by anyone else. That night, once my daughter was asleep, I opened my laptop and pulled up a blank document. I rested my hands on the keyboard. I would write, not just to tell my story, but to speak to those still sitting in silence, in the shadows. To tell them there's a way out. There is a tomorrow. That even if they've been judged, misunderstood, or left behind, they can still live a beautiful life without needing anyone's permission. I typed the first line. I used to think silence was the only way to survive. But now I know, speaking out doesn't make me weak. It makes me free. And I began to write, // I wrote without stopping. The words poured out like a dam breaking after years of pressure. No more edits. No more second guessing. No more wondering whether anyone else would agree. I wrote with truth. And truth, even when it isn't pretty, still holds the power to save. I wrote about the sleepless nights in a cold kitchen, where I sat alone under dim light, imagining myself disappearing and no one noticing. I wrote about the feeling of having my hand pushed away in public, only to be pulled back later for the sake of appearances. I wrote about the first time I understood that love should never come packaged with humiliation. Each page felt like unfastening another chain that had held me captive. Not to seek revenge, but to bear witness. To bear witness that surviving doesn't just mean breathing. It means living with awareness, with choice, with freedom. When the clock struck midnight, I leaned back in my chair, eyes stinging but heart weightless. The first draft wasn't finished, but I knew I was no longer holding my story in silence. I saved the file with a simple name. Chapter 1 Me. I closed the laptop and walked into my daughter's room. She was sleeping soundly, her chubby cheek pressed into the pillow, her tiny hand clutching the edge of the blanket like she was holding onto a world she trusted without question. I bent down and kissed her forehead, then turned back to my room, leaving the door ajar, because for the first time in a very long time, I didn't need to lock myself into darkness to feel safe. I stood in front of the mirror.
No makeup, no lipstick, no polished outfit.
Just me, bare, simple, without disguise. And I smiled. Not because I had won against anyone else, but because I had finally found the most important person I had ever lost. Myself. Tomorrow, there might be more calls, more paperwork, more wounds that haven't fully healed. But now I know I've built a foundation strong enough to stand through any storm. I no longer live to please. I live to be real. And this journey is only just beginning. // the next morning, before the sun had even broken through the mist outside the window, I woke up with nothing weighing on my chest. No dreams that jolted me awake in the middle of the night. No echo of words in my head that made me question my worth. I put on a loose gray sweater, tied my hair up, brewed some coffee, and opened the manuscript I had written the night before. I reread every line, not to edit, but to affirm that every word, every thought was a part of me.
No justifications, no excuses.
Just the truth. Painful, but real. When you've spent long enough playing the role of the patient woman, you come to understand how precious it feels to simply breathe in your own skin. Right in the middle of writing, a notification popped up on my phone, an email from Melissa. Subject: legal termination. Finalized. I opened it. She confirmed that all documents had been approved by the court. No more disputes. No more negotiations. No legal strings left to pull me back into the past. I exhaled, so softly that even I was surprised. Now, if someone were to ask me, what does it feel like to leave a toxic marriage? I would say, not relief. Peace. Like stepping out after a long storm and hearing nothing but the wind brushing gently through the trees. No victory march.
No fireworks.
Just the quiet knowing. You made it. I looked over at my daughter playing on the soft rug, babbling in sounds that made no real sense, her wide eyes looking up at me as if asking, Mama, are you okay? I bent down, picked her up, and held her tightly to my chest. I'm okay now, I whispered. From this moment on, I won't just survive. I'll live, for real. I stepped out onto the porch and looked out toward the horizon, where the sun was slowly rising. Every ray of light felt like it was wiping away the last traces of darkness. And I smiled. Not because everything was perfect, but because for the first time, everything truly belonged to me. / that afternoon, I took my daughter to the park. Not the familiar one I used to stroll through just for show, to let others believe I was a good mother. This time, it was a park I chose, wide open, sun-drenched, with wooden benches facing a still lake that shimmered like glass. I spread a small blanket over the grass, setting my daughter among her soft toys. She babbled away in her own little world, blissfully unaware that her mother had just emerged from the darkest chapter of her life. But I knew, and I would never forget. I sat beside her, holding my brown leather journal, writing down new plans for a new life. No more shoulds or musts. Only wants and choices. Replant the backyard garden, one no social media day per week. Finish my first book before my 36th birthday. Take my daughter to the beach this summer. Looking at that list, I realized it wasn't just a to-do list. It was proof. Proof that I still had desires, still held hope, still believed in brilliant tomorrows, even if they'd once been extinguished, even when I thought nothing was left. A woman about my age sat on the bench nearby. She glanced over, not curious, just quietly empathetic. After a moment, she smiled and said, Your little one is lovely. I have two of my own. But back then, I was once just like you. Alone. I didn't ask more. I didn't need to. We looked at each other, sharing a wordless language. The language of survival and rebirth. A language only those who've lived through it can truly understand. She stood up, gave a gentle wave, and left me with a simple message. You're doing great. Keep going. I turned back to my daughter, who was holding a fallen yellow leaf in her tiny hands, studying it like it was the most magical thing in the world. And I suddenly realized I was learning how to live again. From scratch. From the simplest things. From a leaf, a sunny afternoon, a deep, steady breath. I didn't need to run anymore. Because I was finally exactly where I belonged, with myself, / Here is the uninterrupted English version of your powerful closing monologue. I got out of bed and walked to the window, pulling the curtain aside. The night sky was still full of stars. No fireworks, no applause, no grand soundtrack playing like in the movies. Just me, a woman who was once made to believe she was weak. Once suffocated by compliments laced with control, once loved so wrongly that she thought love always had to come with sacrifice. But not anymore. I stood up, I survived, and I walked away, one step at a time, from everything that made me shrink. I chose myself, and that was the bravest decision of my life. If you're hearing these words, and somewhere inside you something is stirring, maybe an unhealed wound, a silence you've been too afraid to name, or a quiet knowing that you deserve more, then don't turn this off. Don't stay silent anymore. Make yourself one promise. Not that you'll leave tomorrow, but that you'll begin to listen again to the voice within. And if this story reaches you, then do just one thing. Like this video.
Subscribe.
Share it with another woman who might need it. Not for the views, but because we need each other. To know we're not alone. That someone out there has been through it, been suffocated, dismissed, and still found a way back. And if I could do that, then so can you. This isn't just a story. It's a hand reaching out. A whisper in the dark. You don't have to wait for someone to save you. You are your own rescue. /